controlling half the known world, commanding legions that strike fear into every enemy, sitting on mountains of gold and silver, and still going completely, utterly broke. That's exactly what happened to Rome. And the way it collapsed financially? It's a masterclass in how empires destroy themselves from within. The Roman Empire. Just the name conjures images of gladiators, marble temples, and legions marching across continents. For centuries, Rome was the definition of wealth and power. Its treasury overflowed with tribute from conquered lands. Its soldiers were paid in solid silver coins. Its emperors lived in palaces that would make modern billionaires jealous. But here's the twist nobody talks about. By the 3rd century AD, Rome was financially imploding. The empire that once dictated the world's economy couldn't even pay its own soldiers. The currency that built an empire became worthless paper. And the greatest military machine in history, it started accepting payment in vegetables. So what happened? How does the wealthiest empire in human history go from swimming in gold to economic catastrophe? The answer is darker and more fascinating than you think. Let's rewind to Rome at its peak, around 117 AD under Emperor Trajan. The empire stretched from Britain to the Persian Gulf. 3 continents bowed to Roman authority. And the money? Oh, the money was flowing. Rome's economic engine ran on conquest. Every new territory meant fresh loot, new tax revenue, and slaves to work the fields and mines. The denarius, Rome's silver coin, was the dollar of the ancient world. Merchants from India to Spain trusted it. Soldiers died for it. But there was a problem lurking beneath all that glitter. Rome's entire economy depended on one thing: constant expansion. As long as Rome kept conquering, the money kept flowing. But what happens when you run out of places to conquer? Emperor Trajan was the last emperor to significantly expand the empire. After him, the conquests slowed. Then they stopped. And suddenly, Rome's economic model had a fatal flaw. The empire wasn't growing anymore, but the expenses? Those kept climbing. Here's something most people don't realize. Rome's military wasn't just an army. It was the single biggest expense in the entire empire. And we're not talking about a small budget line. At its peak, the Roman military consumed roughly 70 to 80% of the imperial budget. Think about that for a second. 80%. Now, you might say, well, they needed a big army to protect such a massive empire. And you'd be right. But here's where it gets interesting. The more borders Rome had to defend, the more soldiers it needed. The more soldiers it needed, the more it had to pay them. And the more it paid them, the less money was left for everything else. It was a vicious cycle, and Rome walked straight into it. Emperor Septimius Severus, ruling around 200 AD, decided the best way to stay popular was to raise military salaries. He literally told his sons on his deathbed, "Enrich the soldiers and scorn all other men." Great advice for keeping power. Terrible advice for an economy. The result? Military spending spiraled out of control. But the treasury wasn't magically refilling itself anymore. No new conquests meant no fresh loot. Tax revenues were stagnant. So Rome faced a choice: cut military spending and risk rebellion, or find another way to pay the bills. They chose option 2, and that's when things got really ugly. When you're an empire and you're running out of money, you have a few options. You can raise taxes, which makes people angry. You can cut spending, which makes soldiers angry. Or you can cheat. Homme chose to cheat. Here's how it worked. Remember the denarius, that trusted silver coin? Under Emperor Augustus, it was 95% pure silver. Solid, reliable, valuable. But desperate emperors discover a trick. If you melt down those silver coins and add cheap metals like copper or bronze, you can mint way more coins from the same amount of silver. Suddenly, your treasury looks fuller. You can pay your soldiers. Crisis solved, right? Wrong. By the time Emperor Gallienus took power in 260 AD, the denarius was only 5% silver. 5%. The rest? Worthless base metal with a thin silver coating that wore off after a few transactions. People weren't stupid. They could see the coins were fake. So prices skyrocketed. A loaf of bread that cost 1 denarius suddenly cost 10, then 50, then 100. This wasn't just inflation, this was hyperinflation, the kind that destroys societies. Soldiers who were promised payment in silver got paid in what was essentially monopoly money. So they started demanding payment in goods instead. Food, wine, land, anything but the worthless coins. And here's the darkest part. The debasement created a trust crisis. If the government cheats its own people, why should anyone trust it? Trade networks fractured. The economy that once connected 3 continents began to fragment into isolated regions. Rome was eating itself alive. Once you pull the thread on currency debasement, everything else unravels. The middle class, the backbone of Roman society, wiped out. Their savings became worthless overnight. Small landowners, merchants, craftsmen, all destroyed by inflation. Tax collection collapsed because nobody wanted to accept worthless coins. So emperors started demanding taxes in grain and goods instead. But that just made the problem worse because now the government was competing with its own citizens for food and resources. The civil service, once staffed by competent professionals, became corrupt. Why work honestly when your salary is paid in fake money? Bribery exploded. The system rotted from within. And the military? The very institution Rome bankrupted itself to maintain started fragmenting. Generals began minting their own coins and declaring themselves emperor. In the 50 years between 235 and 284 AD, Rome had over 50 emperors. Some lasted months. Some lasted weeks. This wasn't just economic collapse. This was total systemic failure. The empire that ruled the world couldn't even rule itself. So here's the brutal truth about Rome's financial collapse. It wasn't because of barbarian invasions. It wasn't because Romans got soft or lazy. It was because they made a series of choices that seemed logical in the moment, but were catastrophic in the long run. They built an economy dependent on endless growth, then acted surprised when growth stopped. They spent beyond their means to maintain an impossibly large military. And when the bills came due, instead of making hard choices, they debased their currency and destroyed the trust that held their entire civilization together. The Roman Empire didn't fall to foreign armies. It went broke first, and broke empires don't last long. The wildest part? We still haven't learned the lesson. Look around at modern economies printing money to solve debt crises, military budgets consuming national treasuries, governments choosing short-term popularity over long-term stability. History doesn't repeat, but it sure does rhyme. The Roman Empire took 1,000 years to build and barely a century to financially self-destruct. And it all started with one simple question nobody wanted to answer. What happens when the money runs out? Now you know.